Welcome to the Promethei segment of the mouth drill section of our Hiden Tenki Den show. And to start off, I want to emphasize the reason why we really focused on that health variable during the hand drill. And it wrecks your hands. But to go back to a story, as you know, the head guy, the grandmaster of our art, the Bujinkan, the martial art that I train in, Dr. Hatsumi, or Hatsumi Soke, however you want to call him, it was always said that his teacher, Takamatsu Sensei, had he trained his hands to be like weapons, like the old Chinese way of do the hand conditioning kind of thing. He had really thick nails, and his hands were very calloused. His hands were like weapons, basically. And but Hatsumi Sensei never did this. And one of his reasonings for not doing it was that he was a doctor. He was kind of a bone specialist kind of doctor in Japan. And he said that when he had to deal with patients, he couldn't have his hands be like that. And again, I said before, my hands, I can't lose feeling in my hands because I have to do IVs and things like that. And, I have to deal with patients and along those same lines. But either way, even if you're not doing those things, it's really just not practical and really not necessary to just keep damaging your hands like that all the time. I mean, it's just really crazy. People would never ever do a hand drill ever if they had to do that all the time. Now, if you can imagine keeping perspective, this is a life-supporting, life-promoting skill. And going back to our ancestry, when it was necessary to have to start a fire this way, if you can imagine what that must have been like, where you had to do hand drill all the time, even though your life did depend on it, the whole tribe's life depended upon it. But can you just imagine having to do that all the time? Especially when, keeping perspective, when our ancestors left Africa and they started to head north and basically taking over the whole planet, they got into climates that were much colder, had a lot of moisture. They ran into plants and trees that they had never seen before, of different densities, harder densities, all kinds of problems every time they moved around. And again, I talked about my great-grandparents. You have to move around to survive sometimes, and they had to. So this is all part of this. You have to keep perspective as to what this art entails and what you have to do and the ways you have to go about learning it. So what we're basically getting down to is trying to answer the if only question. Later we're going to go over the what if question, but for the understanding the basic form and the science of what we're going to cover with the mouth drill here, you have to kind of look back and it's kind of just like on Schoolhouse Rock, if you can remember that show. Mother Necessity, where would we be? And if you can think of our ancestors, where they would look at their hands and they just go, I just can't, there has to be a better way. And here's the question: if only I didn't have to use so much pressure on my hands, I could save my hands. If only I didn't have to use so much pressure. How can I use less pressure on my hands for turning this drill? Well, somewhere in our history, in humanity's history, somebody or some people came up with the mouth drill, which helps resolve that problem. The problem that we can now definitely feel. It's a very visceral problem for us now, because if you've done the hand drill a few times now already, you know what an issue it is. So the mouth drill seeks to help resolve that problem, and what it does is it's a definite life need. The health issue there is definitely a life need, as well as the energy issue, because it also gives you more energy, because it requires a little less work. And again, here we start this process of more pieces, less effort. Okay, so we're going to start to go up this axis drill scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, where it kind of definitely shows that the more pieces you have, the less effort it is on you, and the more you can accomplish, but it requires more pieces. So here we could see that this life need, this problem, starts to push in evolution. Our humanity started to adapt to this problem. What we would call nowadays, with our technology, we would call it an upgrade. So the mouth drill is an upgrade from the hand drill, in a sense. So in our next segment, the science of the basic form, we're going to go over this. We're going to go over the pad pie process, problem, assess, diagnose, plan, implement, and evaluate how we did, to show you basically, first of all, how we could see the mouth drill came about from the hand drill, and exactly how the devices, the parts, are a little bit different. They vary a little bit different, which I'm going to show you. So we'll go over all of that in detail with these basic pieces right here. These are a bunch of different sets that I have in front of me. Alright, so here we go. Let's get into it. So, before we get into our first basic form of the mouth drill, I'm going to go over a few quick definitions. Now, when I refer to the term techniques, I'm referring to something that you would do to balance out a variable. For example, floating, when you're doing floating, that's considered a technique. Or if you need to stabilize the board and you choose to pin it to the ground with, crossing it over with like an X with 2 pins, that's a technique. Or you put your foot on the board to hold it, that's a technique. So things like that. If your notch is too high in the base and you're afraid that you're going to be working too hard to have to fill the notch, well, you take coil extender and you pre-fill the notch at least halfway or something like that. That's a technique. So things that help balance out the variables, we're going to kind of call techniques. Devices are basically pieces or parts. So you're already familiar with 2 devices, the spindle, right? The spindle and the base, which is on the bottom usually. So, but we're going to be, as we go up in these methods, mouth drill, bow drill, pump drill, toggle drill, and the like, we're going to be adding more devices, more pieces, more parts. So I'm going to refer to them as devices. When we do the mouth drill, the mouthpiece I call a pressure mouth brace, because the other ones are going to have their own name too. They're all pressure braces, but they're specifically for the mouth or for the hand or something like that. So those are devices, are the pieces. Now, method is basically the common denominator form. So if it has the makings of a hand drill, the method is a hand drill. If it looks like a mouth drill, well, then the method is a mouth drill. If it looks like a bow drill, well, the method is bow drill, and so on and so forth. But when I talk about form, Form I'm talking about as the collective of all of that and what it is that you've come up with. So your techniques plus your devices with whatever the form is, whatever the method is what the form is. Whatever you've come up with to balance everything out and get a coal and get a fire started. So that would be the form. Alright, so in the mouth drill, what we're basically doing is we're adding one more device. So we're adding one more piece, and that is the pressure brace, the pressure mouth brace. Okay, so, and this is considered, like we talked about before a little while ago, is kind of like an upgrade. Well, there's always a catch-22 factor for anything that's an upgrade, as we know, because when something becomes obsolete and something changes and it's supposed to be better that they come out with, there's always something else that has to go along with it. So, for example, if you get a new cell phone, you need a new kind of charger or something like that. They're starting to universalize those things now, but before, you know, this one didn't fit this part and this one didn't fit that part, and if you got this phone, this no longer fit this, or if you got an upgrade of a phone, you needed a new kind of charger, things like that. So the thing is that with any kind of upgrade, you have to be careful of the catch-22 factor, which is there are changes, you need to be aware of them, and you need to make sure that you have them in place for the upgrade. So it's not like you just add this device and everything is just perfect and hunky-dory, because that's not always the case. You still, at least with friction fire, you have to go down the list of variables to make sure that everything is balanced. Alright? So you're already in a way familiar with how the mouth drill is going to work, because we did the thumb loop cups. The cup that kind of sits on top of the thumb loop. Well, the pressure mouth brace is kind of the same thing, except you hold it in your mouth and you apply pressure with it with your neck and your body weight that way. So, and you'll see that it works extremely well. And you'll notice that after you've done it a few times, that you'll have a lot more energy and your hands are basically saved, which is a big plus. But you'll notice some other things that seem to balance out really well. But there's some things you need to know, which is what we're going to go over next. Those catch-22 changes, alright? Alright, so our first demonstration with, we're going to go over only natural materials, okay, usually. But first I'm going to assume that you can't get natural materials. I'm going to assume still that it's the wrong time of the year, you can't collect anything, nothing is available. So I'm going to guess that you have to go out and you have to actually buy or purchase some parts to make this work. So here's what I want you to do. The first things that I want you to get are, if you remember from the hand drill, I want you to get your 10 millimeter diameter pair of chopsticks. And remember I said before, get a whole bunch of them. Well, keep getting a whole bunch of these, because you'll probably keep using these, alright? Your 10 millimeter chopsticks, and you can go either to, you know, your kind of, not department store, but your big convenience store, like your Walmart, your Target, even your supermarket is going to have these. And they are a set of bamboo kitchen tools, okay? And they'll come in like 3 or 5 or something like that. This one is a set of 5. And it's made from very thick bamboo. And the handles, as you can see, are very thick. But this is a solid wall of bamboo. Okay. And here we have 5. So here you have your spindle, and guess what? Here you have your bases. Alright. So have these on board, and we're going to do our demo now, next. Okay? Alright, so we're going to prepare our devices for this bamboo mouth drill. So take out your bamboo chopsticks, take off the tie that's probably between them. If not, don't worry about it. Okay? And you want to make sure these are nice and straight, that their axis is straight. The axis is actually, there's a straight axis is actually more vital in the mouth drill than it is in a hand drill, as we're going to come to find. Okay? It's more vital. Now the other thing too is that these bamboo spatula things, they may have some kind of glossing on them, like a polyurethane or some kind of coating on them. Get your sandpaper and take all of that off. So get all your handle, take all of that stuff off. Okay, and then we're going to move on to the next part. Okay, so the next thing I want you to do is to find a piece of wood that's at least ½ inch thick. Okay, now this is a big, thick piece of bamboo, but if you can remember from before, you may find a 2x4 made out of pine from the hardware store. Hopefully you have a piece of this around. So I would just cut a section, okay, that's big enough for your mouth, okay. So I'm going to say it has to be at least 3 to 3.5 inches across, okay. 3 to 3.5 inches across. And I want it to be at least 1 inch to 1.25 inches wide, okay, 1 inch to 1.25 inches, and it should be ½ inch thick, at least ½ inch. All right. So 3 to 3.5 inches by 1 to 1.25 inches by ½ inch. Okay. So, and this will be my pressure mouth brace right here, this one. Alright. So get something like that together, and then what you want to do with it is round it off so that it's forming to your mouth. Okay. So if you notice this piece here, okay, the edges are all rounded off so that there's nothing sharp, because this is going to fit in your mouth like this, okay. So it has to be long enough to go outside your mouth, and it has to be wide enough to receive the spindle, okay, that's going to be sitting inside. Now after you've taken this piece and you've cut it to the measurements that we need, okay, I want you to, where it's a ½ inch wide, okay, the part that's ½ inch wide on the long piece, I want you to take your knife or drill, and I want you to carefully get a hole, okay, into that pressure mouth brace, okay. How far should the hole be? It should be at least 1/4 inch deep, okay, at least. Alright, now how wide should it be? That hole should be at least 1/4 inch wide, okay. So that's why your brace has to be ½ inch. The hole has to be at least 1/4 inch, okay. And those are minimal measurements, alright, by the way. So get that together, and we're going to come back. And if you can, while you're there, find some kind of oil, either a vegetable oil, you know, like a canola oil, or coconut oil, or, you know, sesame oil, any kind of oil. If you're doing woodworking, you may have linseed oil around. That's what I usually have. Something like that. Don't use a motor oil or anything like that. Anything that's silicone based or anything synthetic. try to find a natural oil, okay? Olive oil, anything of that nature, all right? And we'll do the next thing. Now, I want you to try to have a success the first time out, okay? So we're going to do our best to do that. Now, the first thing we're going to do is set up our spindle. So you're going to get your sandpaper, whatever it is abrasive that you have. If you want to do the primitive way, use a sandstone, some kind of rock that's abrasive. And the first thing we're going to do is, because our bamboo is a solid, right, we're going to point up. We're going to pencil point up. Well, not as sharp as a pencil, right? It's basically a shallow point, like we talked about before, but we're going to point up that edge. So we're going to get this bottom to a point. Okay? So we've kind of done that because it was kind of rounded off already. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to measure. Now the spatula handle is our base. So we're going to set back from the edge about 1/4 inch, right? And this is very important. You have to make sure your notch is in the front of the board. Okay, not back here. Not where the base is kind of near you. The notch should not be there. The base should be toward the front. And the reason for this is because you're looking down on the board like this with the pressure mouth brace, you have to see straight down, and that's actually the front of the board. You're not going to be able to see the back of the board because it's going to be hidden behind the spindle. Okay, and you don't want to do that. So our notch is actually going to be forward. Okay, keep it forward so you can keep an eye on what you're doing. So we're going to kind of mark where that's going to be, and we're going to take our knife or our stone, and we're just going to kick out a quick little hole there so that that'll sit in there. Okay? On to the next part. Okay, now we're getting ready to mate everything together. And just so you know, we're not just mating the spindle to the base. Okay, we have this new device. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to be mating both. Okay? So we're going to be mating the spindle to the brace as well as the base. Alright? So here we've carved our hole in our mouth, pressure mouth brace. Okay? We've done that. And this is the reason why I said it's pretty much vital that the spindle be very, very straight. Because here's what's going to happen. This one's not as straight as this one. What's going to happen is that instead of just being unipolar, or one place where the spindle meets the base, right? Like we were able to have a little bit of flexibility with moving around a little bit, even though you want to keep this axis straight, okay? This has the ability to kind of move around a little bit. Well, with the mouth brace, it's now bipolar, okay? Now, any place or any time the spindle, the axis is not straight, it's going to cause a bad vibration. And you know where that vibration is going to go? In your skull, okay, just so you know. Because you're going to be biting down on this pressure mouth brace, and anything that is wrong with the spindle or the axis, the straightness of it, it's going to get translated into your head. And our most famous line for that was, it feels like kissing a jackhammer. And it's not a very pleasant feeling. But if your spindle and your axis is absolutely straight, and you have a good mouthpiece, pressure mouth brace, you should be fine. Okay, there should be no issues. All right. Now for this demonstration here, and what I would want you to do too, is actually not have to worry about securing this with your foot or something like that. I would really like for you to do this on some kind of tabletop or chair top or something like that, and I would like for you to have it viced down in some way, just to get you started off with, just so you get the idea of how this method goes and what a basic form looks like. Okay? The next thing you're going to need is actually what I would recommend, a paper towel. Okay. Get 1 ply of a paper towel and fold it over once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. Okay, so you have another square. Fold it over 4 times. Now, you're going to fold over that paper towel over your mouth brace with the hole on the bottom. Okay? Now this is very important, and it's for 2 reasons. One, it saves your teeth. Okay? You don't want to damage your teeth. So you don't want to be biting down on this hard piece of wood, alright, if there's any kind of vibration. So again, our health variable is very important. The other thing too is that, let's just face it, you're going to drool. Okay? Saliva is going to drip out of your mouth because your mouth is open and facing straight down, and you're not going to be able to swallow that. Okay? You're not going to be able to hold on to it. And your lips around the pressure mouth brace alone usually just doesn't cut it. Alright? And for some reason it's not very, I don't think it's very sanitary. But with the paper towel, you give yourself a little bit of cushioning for your teeth. Okay? It catches all the drool, and then if you don't need any more, you just throw it away in the garbage. Okay? So your mouth pressure brace is about 1/2 inch thick, right? And then you have the paper towel over that. Well, when this goes in your mouth, at this point, it should be a pretty comfortable fit. And you should be able to bear down pretty hard on that paper towel. Okay, that should be no problem. Alright? And you should have your oil here. I have a little shot glass full of linseed oil. Now don't use the oil yet, because first we have to mate this together, and that's what we're going to do. Okay? So the other thing I want you to do actually is take off a little bit of the top of your spindle. Okay? So here you have this really thin piece at the top. I want you to go down about 2 inches. And from 2 inches, I want you to be able to just cut that off. Okay? Right there. Because what that ends up happening is that piece is just a little too thin. Alright? So we're going to get rid of that. And then you're just going to put a little bit of a point on that. Quickly with your sandpaper or your rock or your file, whatever it is you choose to abrade with. Okay. Alright. And then we're ready to go to mate this together. Okay. Alright, spindle, base, okay, pressure mouth brace, paper towel, just get into a nice comfortable position. Okay, so now your next stage is your bottom part of your spindle is mated to the board. Your top part of your spindle is mated to your mouth brace. Okay, you can see it's a little burnt in there. Now, it's at this point that it seems well mated. It seems like a ball in the socket joint there. That's when you want to add just a little bit of oil. You dip that in your linseed oil, not a lot, and you work that around, okay, inside the pressure brace. Okay, clean off any excess oil, okay. Make sure that's well worked in there. Okay. Now the other thing too is we're going to unclamp this and we're going to do our notch just like we would with the hand drill. It doesn't go quite to center, and as you know, I prefer the kind of trapezoidal type of notch, but again, it's your choice. Now the bottom of this, of the spindle, what we're going to want to do with that is, because this is a solid, if it's rounded off at all, we want to flatten that down. So we're going to take our sandpaper or our rock, and we're just going to make that completely flat. Okay? Because what's going to happen is that center, if you remember, if it's a solid, that's a dead space that doesn't spin very well and doesn't give you the kind of friction that we're looking for. Alright? Now, if you want to, you can hollow that a little bit, but be very careful you don't take off too much surface area. Okay, just a little bit. So now we're going to carve our notch, and then we're going to put it all together and get a coal. Okay? Alright, so we're ready to get ourselves a coal. Here I have that sliver of wood you saw earlier for transferring a coal. Okay, we have that under our base. Our base is secured down with our quick grip vise. Okay, I have a little bit of tinder bundle here for when we're ready, because we're going to go from start to finish. So we take the mouth brace, we line that up with our paper towel. So we get in position. We make sure that we can eyeball the notch. And of course, first we go through that basic warm-up process, you know, like we're boiling the water. So we get it warmed up, then we add a little bit more pressure, a little bit more speed, ignite the coal, and then we'll transfer it from there. Here we go. So now we're going to transfer the coal. You have time. Okay, goes in your bundle. Always hold underneath the tinder bundle, okay, because flames go up, right? Hold underneath it. Okay, so Now that you've seen the basic form of the mouth drill, I mentioned before about those the problems of an upgrade, like those catch-22 changes that are involved every time that happens. Well, let's go over those now. So, your spindle, for example, compared to a hand drill, needs to be a little stouter, a little stronger, more sturdy than your hand drill, because your hand drill can have a little bit of flexibility because it's unipolar, right, and it's moving around and stuff like that. Now this cannot. This cannot move around because it's bipolar and it's connected to your head. It's connected to your skull. And as you hopefully did not find out, any little vibration will go into your skull. If you get a really, really bad spindle, okay, one that's really wobbly or one that's really off, you're going to really see the difference. Okay, if you're starting off with a really good spindle, you know, great. You know what that's supposed to be like, but it's when you experience one that's really bad that you really know the difference between the two. So your Maltro spindle needs to be stronger, possibly a solid most of the time. You don't usually get away with too many hollows, although we're gonna maybe try one or two hollows just to show that it can be done. But a lot of times, usually this is done with a solid. And like we said before, our ancestors did a lot of traveling around. They got into colder climates. They got into, they discovered new and different plants and trees and other species like that that they had to work with. So, but things that were more denser had more hardness. So, therefore, giving this pressure mouth brace, you're able to give a little bit more pressure than you are with just your hands. So therefore, you're able to work with denser woods. So before, with the hand drill, if it was harder to do a solid, it should be easier now to do a solid with a mouth drill than obviously it is with a hand drill. Because most of the hand drills, the natural materials are hopefully hollows, which have less surface area and are hopefully less dense. So the mouth drill makes up for that variable of if you have the problem of a higher density and you have more surface area of it being solid. Okay, so we have that. Now, the other thing too is the comfortable fit. Okay, this has to be really comfortable. This is why I really recommend the paper towel. If you don't have a paper towel, you want to go the primitive or natural way, you could use a piece of buckskin. I mean, you could use your clothing. I would maybe use a fresh green leaf or some large green leaves or something like that. Just as kind of a comfort zone between the hardwood and your teeth. So just to keep on that health variable, that safety variable. All right. Your Maltro spindle might also be just a hair thicker in diameter than your hand drill spindle. And the reason for that is that since you're bearing down pressure with this mouthpiece, you're actually able to apply more pressure than with just your hands. So you have more pressure going downward. That makes it harder to spin the stalk, okay, because you have this pressure. So, but a thinner stalk, a thinner spindle is going to be harder to turn than a thicker one because you won't be able to get a grip on it. Now with the hand drill, if your hands were already rubbing together because it's like a 3/8 or thinner than that, well, maybe we would like to start off with a 10 millimeter, which is thicker than a 3/8, okay? And maybe go up high enough to be as much as ½ inch, possibly, if you have big hands. So 10 millimeter, 7/16, 12 millimeters, up to I'd say ½ inch. ½ inch would probably have to be the largest. that you'd have to go with as a diameter, okay? But I wouldn't do anything smaller than 3/8, definitely. In fact, me personally, I wouldn't go anything smaller than 10 millimeters because I just can't seem to get a grip around the spindle as I'm spinning it while you're bearing down that pressure. Okay, so that's important to keep in mind. Let's see what else. You want a pretty good deep socket with the mouth brace because you don't really want this slipping or sliding out. Now, when you're starting off doing this, there's always maybe a fear that it's going to pop out, it's going to hit you in the mouth, it's going to crack your teeth, it's going to, you know, cut your lip, or worse, go in your eye, up your nose or whatever. But especially an eye injury, you really don't want that, which is why you really have to be on your game and be aware of what you're feeling, okay, with what's going on. So a good seated spindle socket is going to be really key too as well, not just for safety, but just for the overall efficiency of the whole method in general. So have a good lubricant. Okay, now since you're doing this at home usually, a good natural lubricant like one of the food oils, canola, sesame, doesn't matter, whatever it is that you prefer, vegetable oil, Crisco, which is an animal fat. If you want to try the primitive way, you know, when you're cutting your steaks, or you know, you could use chicken skin, put a little bit on there just to grease it up in the natural way. Out in nature, you'd use tree sap, something slimy like a slime mold, something like that. The other thing too is that while you're outside, if you're sweating, you're going to have a little bit of grease on your skin. So usually the sides of your nose are best, maybe behind your ear, something like that. You know, hopefully that's not too gross for you. But it's been done. So just to keep that in mind. All right. So what else is there? And so we're going to keep doing a few more natural material mouth drill examples, just so you kind of get the idea. But there's an obvious, remember how I went over the natural law thing? The reward and penalty is usually life and death. But here there's a direct natural law penalty where the reward is you get a coal, but nothing hurts your head, okay? If this axis is not straight and there's a lot of vibration, there's going to be a penalty, okay? It's going to feel really, really bad inside your head. And so make sure all your parts are balanced. Make sure your board is stable so it doesn't slip on you, so you don't have any accidents. And we're just going to keep going over it a few times, and then we'll go on to advanced variations, the art of variations. All right, let's see what's next. All right, so hopefully that worked out well for you. Okay, now if you couldn't find bamboo spatulas, and they should be really easy to find. If you can't find one, I'm going to show you another trick, alright? And it'll be a little challenging, but I think you could pull it off. So, you're going to need, if we start from scratch, another pair of those 10 millimeter chopsticks, okay? Which, as you know, is 1 centimeter. Okay, 10 millimeters is 1 centimeter. Now, for this, you may need a ruler. This one happens to be clear, so maybe hard to see. A ruler that not only has centimeters, but has millimeters on it for measurements, okay? You will need to find yourself a mouthpiece. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to carve this down. This is a piece of branch of chestnut, which I cut recently, and if you do not include the bark, it's exactly 1 inch across in diameter. So what I'm going to be doing is taking off the bark, and I'm going to be shaving off 2 sides. So I'm going to get this down to about, it'll be 3/4 of an inch in thickness, and you'll see that I'll have left the top and the bottom still rounded, and I'll show that to you when I'm all done. Now you have a choice. Well, first of all, let's look at our chopsticks and see how straight they are. Okay, this one is straighter than this one, so this one's going to be our spindle. That's right. So the one that's not so straight is going to be our base. Alright, so this may be a little challenging. Now, what I want you to do is, first of all, we're going to take the one that's our base, and we're going to cut that in half. Okay? Right where the half point is. Now, you have a choice. You can either leave this rounded and be more challenged, or you could take it down on both sides about 1 millimeter, so that when you put this on your ruler, okay, for the centimeter, there's 1 millimeter off on each side, which makes this now 8 millimeters thick, okay, but it's still rounded on each side, which means that it's 8 millimeters by 10 millimeters by 1 centimeter still, okay. But I just want, you may just want to flatten it for stability, okay, if you don't have a good vise. Now when you cut this in half and this is rounded, if you choose to go the rounded way and be a little bit more challenged, great, okay. So I'm going to do the rounded one. You can see this is the flat one, and we did that one already. Okay, you can see it's rounded on the top and the bottom, and it's flattened on each side. So that's 8 millimeters by 10 millimeters. And this one is already used. As you can see, we got a fire out of this one. But let's say you're going to choose the challenging one, and you're going to keep this one round. And we're going to do something like that. Okay? So I'm going to adjust this. So in a way it looks actually like this here, flattened on each side and still rounded. So we'll turn this into a mouthpiece. Now if you don't have a round branch, I'm sure at your hardware store you're going to have a piece of pine. So remember those measurements I talked about? 3 inches by, at a minimal, 1/2 inch. Okay, this one is 1/2 inch on top, and you can see it triangulates out. It's 3/4 of an inch on the bottom. So I'm going to have 3/4 of an inch on the bottom. It's 1/2 inch on top where it goes in the mouth, and it's 1.25 inches, about 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches tall, and it's 3 inches long. Okay, and I rounded it off on the belt sander. Of course, I could have used sandpaper roller. All right, so I'm going to throw these together, show you the finished products, and then we're going to mate these together again, so you see that process again, and then we're going to get ourselves a coal. Okay, so we've adjusted our devices. Okay, now the spindle, if you can remember before, the top is a little thin. We took 2 inches off, and I put a medium point on the top so that can mate. Now the bottom, now remember these are of equal diameter, so the spindle is going to need to be a smaller diameter than the base. So our base is a centimeter. It's 10 millimeters in diameter, and I've started a hole with my knife where it's going to mate together with the spindle. Now 1.5 inches up from the bottom, I have taken off 2 millimeters, or a total of 2 millimeters, so 1 millimeter from each side, which means that if I use my gauge, okay, whereas the rest of this chopstick is 10 millimeters, this 1.5 inches right here that I've taken down is now 8 millimeters, okay, according to the gauge. So, And what that'll do is that'll leave us what? 1 millimeter on each side of our base. This is the flat one, if you decided to flatten it. This will leave us 1 millimeter of wood on each side of our base to be able to pull this off. And I mentioned before that there's a difference in our spindles compared to hand drills, where we want them a little thicker. While comparatively, right here, where it's thinner, the diameter, we have the 10 millimeter diameter, which we're using to use our back and forth motion with our hands, but the diameter here is smaller. So what that means is it's like changing gears on a bicycle when you're going uphill. You're spinning a larger diameter, but it translates to less rotations and less speed where the diameter is smaller, right? So you're going to have to use some pretty good speed, and you're going to have to really improve your rotations, your back and forth rotations on this to really get this going, okay? So our mouthpieces, what I've done here is I have just to quicken things, and just because it's really awesome, is there's a cone, a braiding tool that will go with a Dremel. And what I do is I just shove that in there, at least 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit more, set in to help mate with the spindle. And I'm starting this one here on the chestnut. As you can see, the chestnut branch is now, the bark is all off, and it's flattened on each side, and it's rounded on the top and the bottom still, okay? And this will fit comfortably along with my paper towel, right? So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, like we did before, and that will wrap over, leaving the bottom with the hole on the bottom. Now I didn't finish this one, just so you could see, all right? And now we've set that in, and that will help with the mating process to get this going. I'm going to use the chestnut one. I'm going to leave the pine one aside. So we're going to secure our base. Now the thing is you have to be very, very careful of drift when you're working with measurements this small. I mean, we're literally talking about 1 millimeter of wood on each side, right? Your flat one or your round one, but we're going to do the round one just so you can see that it's done. And I've medium pointed the top where the spindle is going to receive in the pressure mouth brace, and I've medium pointed the bottom of the spindle where it's going to mate with the base. Okay. So let's mate this together. Okay, our pressure mouth brace is really starting to smoke, and it's well mated. So what we're going to do is, early, we're going to oil that right now, because we're still mating our bottom piece. I'm going to adjust by pointing up the bottom again. Because it seemed to flatten out too early. You make these adjustments as you go, okay? It never always goes as planned. You're lucky if it does. Just so you can see this process. Let's try that again. I'm going to put more of a hole, carefully, in our base. I've medium pointed the bottom of the spindle again, just to make adjustments. Okay. Now another issue is smoke. Now, unlike the hand drill, now you can move your head any which way and you can blow at the bottom, but now your mouth is occupied, you can't blow away the smoke out of your face, and your head is directly over the smoke. So that's an issue that has to be dealt with. So if you don't have a breeze blowing through, this is why we talked about having that fan available. So we're gonna flip that on. It's right here on the side. Okay. And it's going to remove the smoke from coming straight and drifting up into our eyes, our face, our nose when we breathe it in. Okay. So you have to be really careful about not going too deep. Now, it's well mated. It's well mated, which means that it's burnt up to over the side, over the edge. Okay? So that's sitting in there pretty good. But you have to be careful you don't go down too far, because you need this wood here to be able to start the coal, okay, to get it ignited. If you don't have enough wood, you're going to burn straight through it. You're going to go right down to the bottom. Now, when you're doing it this way, with this one chopstick, you basically get one shot. You're lucky if you get two, but let's say you're going to get one shot. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to flatten this out, and I'm going to put my favorite trapezoidal notch in here, and we'll come right back. This may seem like a silly point, but really it's not. Occasionally, you may accidentally put your greased, oiled spindle top into your base because you're either not looking or paying attention, something like that. It happens to everybody. So sometimes you may just want to mark which is the top. Okay, sometimes we carve a slight groove, one that's not deep, so it doesn't destroy the functionality of the spindle. Or you know, you put a piece of marker, you know, drawing on there just to identify what's the top in case it gets confusing. But it happens. But if the grease or the oil touches the inside the base, you have to sand out the whole base again. That whole notch, okay, because you have to get all of that grease out of there, or otherwise you're just going to be spinning like a pressure brace, and there'll be no friction. So let's anchor down our base. with our vise. And this, I still want you to do that just so you get the idea of what we're doing, because stability is an important key issue here. All right. Now I flatten the bottom of our solid bamboo chopstick spindle, right? Because there's always a dead space in the center that doesn't spin as well and causes less friction. All right. Now this is well made in here. This isn't going to slip out, even though there's only, I mean, literally 1 millimeter of wood on each side. All right. Now the other thing too is you have to be very careful of drift, and drift is controlled literally by moving forward or backward with your whole body where your head is. Okay, so, and it's, again, our notch is forward so that we can eyeball it. All right, we're going to turn our fan on just to keep smoke out of our face and give it a go. Here we go. We're going to do our obvious warm-up process. And we've drilled into the notch. So we're going to do that again. Okay, so I allowed for drift, and it drifted right into the notch. Just like it did with our first hand drill attempt, right? If you can remember back then. So I'll try and be more careful this time, lean forward a little bit so that it drifts backward away from the notch. We'll warm it up, and here we go. There's our coal. And all I have to say is, if I could do it, you could do it too. Alright, so with that last bamboo one, I mean, I do definitely want you to see that I get some fails, you know. It's an important process to see in the training, otherwise how else are you going to learn what mistakes you're going to run into. So, and it's sincere, you know. I don't do everything perfectly all the time, and it's all part of the process. So, if you don't get bamboo, one of the things you may be able to get at the hardware store is cedar. So usually it's like Western red cedar or something like that, but I happen to have Atlantic white, which really doesn't, it's in the cedar family. My spindle is a carved piece of Atlantic white cedar, and it is throughout 12 millimeters in diameter. Okay. Now I have flattened the bottom, and I took a little bit of the surface area out. I took out the center, so I made it a little bit of a hollow, at least to start off with. It doesn't go all the way through, just about a 1/4 inch. I've placed an almost pencil point at the top to mate with our pressure mouth brace. Now you notice this pressure mouth brace is a little shorter. It's not 3 inches across or 3.5 like the other ones are. This one's only 2, but the dimensions are still about the same. It's 1.5 inches tall, and it's 3/4 of an inch wide. Okay, and it has a good fit, which put your paper towel on, and you can bear down on it pretty well. So I'm gonna mate this together, and what I've done is I've done just like with our hand drill. I took out our little divot there to get that started with my knife, and I went around and then I pulled out that little piece of wood. So that sits in there fairly well, but it still needs to be mated. And we're going to mate both of these actually. My pressure mouth brace, by the way, is also Atlantic white cedar. So all 3 pieces are of the same wood. And one of my favorite things to do is to make sure that all my devices, no matter all the parts, all the pieces, are of the same wood. So you'll see that next also with the bow drill when we get into that section as well. So let's just mate this together. Okay, so our top and our bottom fit together. We're going to grease with our linseed oil the top. Get that nice and smooth. And we have a little bit of a button in there because I hollowed out the center. Okay. I'm going to do my notch, and we're going to give it a go. Now our Atlantic white cedar board is only 1/2 inch tall, and since I've mated it together, it's now less than 1/2 inch from the depth of the hole, right? So we probably will only get 1 shot out of this because that's not a lot of wood. But it'll be enough. And so we'll put our pressure mouth brace on, our paper towel, we're going to get it warmed up and see how it goes. Well, that went really well. So this was all Atlantic white cedar. Cedar you should be able to get at your hardware store. Let's close up on that. Ready? I love that. Now it's not a fire yet, it's just a coal, which means that it's just a conceived, right? So it would go in the tinder bundle, which would be like in biology a uterus, and for it to be born, it would have to become fire. So On to the next one. Alright, so our next one is made up entirely of natural materials. So this is yucca. The spindle is made from a yucca stalk. This one is 11 inches tall. So that doesn't give us too much room, which is why you do this on a tabletop, kind of to begin with. So you like to keep everything in control when you're first starting out to learn this method. Because you know that, that fear that this will come loose and kind of hit you in the face kind of thing, it could be a pretty real fear. In fact, it's enough of a fear that it actually keeps people from actually trying this method. Okay? And our spindle is at the top is 10 millimeters. Okay? But at the bottom it is 7/16. So it's a little larger, I mean just a hair larger in diameter at the bottom than it is on top, which means that we can actually get more rotation in theory, okay, by spinning near the top, which will make the bottom spin faster. Now our base is actually half of the bottom portion of a yucca. And again, like I said before, I like all my pieces to be of the same material, including the pressure mouth brace. The pressure mouth brace is a very large bottom portion of a yucca. And what this is actually is I use this for a fire plow, which is one of the methods that you'll see later. And I didn't just want to throw it away. So I turned it into a pressure mouth brace. It's got a hole in the bottom in the groove that was made by the fire plow. Okay, but it's still round. More than three quarters of this is still round. And it makes a nice fit in the mouth, even with the paper towel. And the base is the bottom part of a thick yucca split in half. Now, you can see why I chose this as a base instead of using it for like what would be later a Bojel spindle or something like that. It's pretty crooked. It's got a good bend in it. But it has other uses, obviously. So we're going to pin this to our table. Okay. We're going to put our paper towel on our pressure mouth brace, and we're going to put a little divot in our yucca. Now remember, yucca is a very low density wood. And what you should know about yucca and its personality is the center of the stalk is always softer than the outside. The outside is a different density than the inside. And actually sometimes I think it could be too soft. So once you drill through the outer sections or through the outer sections to the inside, sometimes I think it's not dense enough to actually support getting a coal. So we're going to try and do this in one shot with the denser wood that's on the outside. But first it has to get mated together, right? So we're going to do that now. Okay, well that's well mated. Okay, that's not going to go anywhere, you can see. Alright, now this has a few slight bends in it, the spindle, so I could feel the vibration in my skull, but it's not bad. It's really not bad at all. So now we're going to flatten out our bottom, right? Because there's a dead space in the center. And I'm going to put my notch in there. and we're gonna light this up. Okay. All right, so we flattened our bottom. Okay. We're gonna re-grease our top, just for luck. All right. Work that in there. Okay. Now I know we're only gonna get one shot at this, because by the time we break through to that softer part of the yucca, hopefully we won't reach it early. It won't work after that. So, and I'm going to try not to drill into the notch again this time. So we're going to warm it up and see how we do. First I'm going to put our sliver of cold transfer wood under there. Here we go. Oh. Well, I actually broke through the bottom of the base. So we're going to try that again. I had it too close to the other old hole. So that didn't give me a chance to finish. So let's try that again real quick. Okay, so I remated a new hole there in the base, and I've already put in my trapezoidal notch. I'm going to flatten out our dead space bottom because the yucca is a solid, right? And again, for luck, a little bit more oil, although it's been working well, it hasn't been burning or anything. And give it round number 2. Alright. And it happened actually just like I said. As soon as it got softer, I really started to go right through the base. But we had just enough wood to get ourselves our coal. So here's our whole yucca set. It's a solid. And on to the next one. Now I said earlier I was going to show you one of the hollows and how they work. Now one of the sturdier ones that I would definitely recommend is the goldenrod. Goldenrod is one of my favorites. One of my favorite hand drills, one of my favorite mouth drills, especially when it comes to a good spindle. This is a really good one for learning the hand drill, by the way, on top of what we're about to demo with the mouth drill right now. So it is a pithy hollow. Okay, it's not a true hollow. It has a little bit of pith in it. And this one, in case you're curious, happens to be 10 millimeters in diameter. Okay, right down here at the bottom where I've shaved off, you can see it's a lot cleaner down here than it is up here. There's a little bit of stringy fibers coming off here. That's okay, it helps me get a grip. But down here it has to be all nice and smooth and string free so it doesn't destroy our coal. Now this one has a slight bend in it. I don't know if you can see, but it's not very straight, but it's straight enough where I could tolerate the vibration just enough. So now our base, again, is something that you can get at the hardware store. It's a piece of pine. And along with our theme of trying to keep things together, my pressure mouth brace is the other piece of pine, which I showed you earlier. All right. Now this is already mated together. Okay. I've already mated this to the board, and it already has a notch in it. So I'm just going to do the demo right now. Okay, just to show you that a hollow can do this. Now the thing about it being a hollow, right, is it's like a straw you drink out of. Now you know the old trick about popping a straw through an apple. Well, and the physics behind how that works is as long as the pressure remains behind the walls of the length of the straw, it's very strong. But anytime you start to go sideways with the pressure, the straw breaks and it's no good. Okay, so you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're doing this. The pressure has to be maintained where it's focused straight down the walls of the spindle in this, like a straw. And your hands, when you're doing the back and forth motion, doing the rotations. Now, if you watch your hands, think about it. It's a simultaneous push and pull, right? Simultaneous push and pull around one point, around that axis, okay? So anytime you have a deviation of that where you're not integrated and not coordinated, you're pushing against the sides of the straw and you're going to destroy its integrity. So you have to be very careful, all right? Keep those physics in mind. We have our paper towel. Put that on our pressure mouth brace. Get in position. Okay, get up on the table here. And here we go. We're going to warm it up, get a coal. Let's keep going. So that time I just needed to go a little longer. Okay. And we'll get a close-up of that. Okay. All right. This time I'll bring it to you. Right there. goldenrod on pine board with pine pressure brace. All right, let's keep going. So one of the natural materials I just happen to have up my sleeve here, and especially for the West Coasters who may be feeling a little left out, this is a saguaro cactus rib, which of course has been taken down and smoothed down to a spindle. So it's carved down, sanded down, okay? Cactuses, saguaro cactuses, if you don't know, they have these ridges that run through them. They're called ribs because they look like ribs. And some of them make pretty good spindles. And they're really great for friction fire. So my board also happens to be a very small piece of saguaro that I also have. In fact, sometimes I get so maniacal about keeping my pieces together that are the same that I wanted a pressure mouth brace that's also saguaro. So I took a piece of my saguaro base and I made a very small little pressure mouth brace out of it. It's already been mated. This one is really small. I mean, it's even smaller than the measurements that I gave you. It's 2.5 inches long, it's 1/2 inch wide, and it's 3/4 inches tall. So, but in this instance, I'm not going to be holding it lengthways this way. It's actually going to be laying sideways in my mouth this way because the hole is on the flat of the bottom. Okay, so it's a little tricky, but the measurements that I gave you are really safe, but I just want to kind of show some of the things that can be done, since this is the science of the basics here, of the basic form. All right, so this has already been mated. The spindle is mated to the base. The pressure brace is mated to the spindle. It has a slight bend in it, if you could see, if I spin it slowly. Okay, but it's straight enough, which I realized as it was being mated, that I can deal with a little bit of the vibration. It's not horrible. Wait till you get one that's really bad. You're really going to see the difference. Okay, so we got our cold transfer sliver there, again for good luck. We got our paper towel so that we can bear down on this little piece, and we're going to warm it up, and here we go. Let's see how this goes. Almost. Let's keep going. All right, that did it. All right. West Coast in the house represents. There we go. Saguaro. Saguaro rib. Base. Spindle. And pressure mouth brace. All at once.